Over my career, I've done a lot of interviews with some well-known people and some people no one's heard about before. I thought it might be fun to drag some of them out of the archives and share them here on YouTube. And if you've ever watched the Yogi Bear show, you know there was a little duck named Yankee Doodle. Jimmy Weldon was the voice of that duck and so much more. He became a motivational speaker, appeared in a lot of early television, and was a television pioneer back in the 1950s. Jimmy, thanks for being here, and let me ask you straight away, where are you from originally? You got a neat accent.
I was born in a little town called Dale, D-A-L-E, Texas. Just a little bitty town. Maybe 50 people live there. And I don't know how long we lived there, but from what Mom and Dad and the brothers talk about, probably I was 2 years old when we moved down on a farm near Driscoll, Texas, D-R-I-S-C-O-L, and that was down by Corpus Christi. We moved into town then from the farm, and we lived in Driscoll, big old two-story red house, and there were probably about 120 people lived in Driscoll, and that was really a metropolis. Lived there till I was 7 years old, and then we moved to Chickasha, Oklahoma. I'll never forget, we were thinking, man, Oklahoma, we thought it was Indians. We'd see Indians behind every tree.
Well, sure, they called it Indian territory.
That's right. And so we arrived Halloween night, October the 31st, 1930. And we lived there until I graduated from high school. That was my hometown. We can just say I grew up in Chickasha, Oklahoma. That was it. 13,000 people live there, and probably 18,000 now, and it never grew that much. I always tell people every time a new baby is born, someone left town. That's an old joke.
Yeah, but it's still fun.
All right. But anyway, my first entertainment life started right there in Chickasha with a movie called 10 Nights in a Bar Room.
How old would you have been when you saw
7 years old. That was it.
Sounds like kind of a rough movie.
Oh, Dennis, listen, I didn't know what a movie was. I thought everything was real. And I'm thinking about 10 Nights in a Bar Room as being the first movie a little 7-year-old boy would see. This is the time when everything ended happily. That later this guy became the mayor of the city, but I didn't wait that long. I knew him as the town drunk. He would be in the saloon drinking, and his little daughter would go through the swinging doors of the saloon every afternoon and say, "Daddy, will you come home with me now?" And he'd stagger out, and that was the way every day went. But this one time she went through the swinging doors, the bartender was having a fight with her father. He threw a bottle of beer at him, and he ducked and hit the little girl in the head. And I screamed, "Mama! Mama!" Oh, man, it beat all I ever saw. And Dennis, I can see it just as clear now as I could then. But anyway, I screamed, and my brothers took me home. They were embarrassed. And when I got home, I was crying, and Mom said, "What is it?" And I told her the story, or I tried to tell her about it. I said, "Mom, he killed that little girl." She said, "Babe, what are you talking about?" And I said, "Mom, he killed her." And when my two brothers came in to try to explain, Mom said, "Oh, leave him alone. Going out, boys." She told me it was play-like. I didn't even know what a movie was. And then she told me what acting was. And I thought, golly, acting? You mean she wasn't hurt, Mom? I said, no, she's just playing a part. And when I told her I saw the blood on her head, she said, "No, that's probably ketchup." Well, I could understand that as a little 7-year-old boy. But I remember when Mama said, "Babe, they probably gave her some milk and cookies after they did that scene." I looked up and I said, "Mom, if it was me, I'd want some vanilla wafers." And she said, "They probably have those in Hollywood, too."
Now, Jimmy, I know you speak to a lot of student groups. Do you tell them about that incident, about the movie when you were 7?
Oh, we always start off by saying...
Because I can just see you at your age now talking to college-age kids about what life was like back then, in the Depression.
Yeah.
But also what those early images can do. It's early programming.
Yeah.
Well, now, you mentioned your mother was so comforting to you. I think there's a special relationship between mothers and particularly the youngest son.
Yes, that's right, Dennis.
She must have played a large part in your early life then.
Yes, she did. Bless her heart. She was my real companion. We'd go to the movie every Saturday and go to see the cowboy movies and in all the serials they had, 13 weeks.
And a cliffhanger at the end of every...
Can't wait till next week to go back and see what's happening.
And buy more popcorn.
That's right. Those Nickelback bags of popcorn were so good.
Jimmy, why did your folks, unless it's a secret, why did they move from very rural Texas to a kind of sizable town, 13,000? Why go north?
Oh, well, all right, here it is. Dad was working at a Texaco station. He worked for a man named Dick Moss. He was in charge of the Texaco products in that area, and he was going to move to Chickasha, Oklahoma, and take over a franchise or whatever you call it up there. And he wanted Dad to go with him and open a station. And that's when my dad became a station operator himself. He actually owned his own station. And he was so thrilled when they got to close on Sunday and go to church, because he had to work 7 days a week. He'd go to work, open that little station at 6 in the morning, come home at 8 or 9 o'clock at night. Oh, listen, you don't know what it means to have a father that was so dedicated to his family like my dad was, or a mother that was so dedicated to her children.
Jimmy, most of your career, you have made a lot of people very happy doing the voice of a duck in cartoons and television and radio. How old were you when you first discovered you could do that kind of voice?
Delivering papers. Started delivering papers. Chickasha Daily Express. One afternoon, we were collecting our papers in the back of the room where the Chickasha Daily Express was produced and published. But anyway, we were folding our papers, and one of my carriers was standing by me, and he said, "Oh boy, oh boy." I looked at him, I said, "R.M., that sounds like Donald Duck." He said, "What do you think it's supposed to sound like?" Because I've never heard anybody do that. "Show me how you did that." He went, "Oh boy, oh boy." I tried to do, I looked at his mouth, and all the guys in there phoning up were laughing. I said, "Wait, what are you guys laughing at?" Says, "Can any of you do this?" RM's the only one, but I'm going to do it. I'll learn how to do it. It's the last thing I ever do. And "Yeah, you probably will." That made me so mad I couldn't stand it. And I spent days learning how to make that sound. One morning I woke up and went, that's it. And then I grabbed the right cheek with my fist. That's where it is. I knew that's where the sound was coming from, but how in the thunder did he make any words? How could he put them together? I spent days learning how to speak so I could be understood. I'd answer the phone. "Hello?" It was one of my brother's friends. I'd hand him a phone and say, "Oh, it's Phil." They'd grab the phone and put their hand over the mouthpiece and say, "Mama, don't even answer the phone. He's crazy." I did that. I talked Donald Duck morning, noon, and night, everywhere. The only one that didn't laugh was Mom. Dad would just shake his head and smile. One day I answered the teacher in school. She asked me something, Miss Mary Bailey. She asked me a question. I jumped up out of the chair and I said, "Yes, ma'am, that's right." And I had to stay in after school. Now, fast forward, I was the MC of our 50th graduation reunion, and Miss Mary Bailey walked up to me and said, "You know, it's strange that little did I realize I made you stay in after school that voice would become such an important voice around the world. So I was afraid I might have inhibited you." I said, "Yeah, you really hurt me, Miss Bailey." And we'd laugh.
That's incredible. When did you first find that you were able to do it in public? I think you entered a talent show?
Jimmy Wakely had a radio program at WKY in Oklahoma City. Every morning it was a trio, the Jimmy Wakely Trio. And their theme song, "Get up and feed those chickens, or Paul raise the dickens. We're going to make them grow before we're done. Oh, it's everything that chickens need, that any chicken needs, superior all in one." I blew some of it, but most of those words really lit what it was.
Well, it was a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I think it was. And so he would go around with his trio to the little towns. It was a good promotional thing for him because it helped his audience. At the same time, it made the audience grow. He'd go to little towns and put on amateur shows, and the winner of the amateur show would go to Oklahoma City and be on his radio program. He came to Chickasha and did an amateur show at the theater that I had run out of 5 years earlier, the Rialto Theater.
When you saw 10 Nights in a Bar Room.
That's exactly right, Dennis, yes. And now I'm going to do Donald Duck singing Three Little Fishes. And can you imagine me? Yes, I can't even do it
well,
now.
It's hard enough to sing those words when you're not doing a voice.
That's right.
It's a tongue twister.
That's right. And so Jimmy Wakely would put his hand over the talent, and then they'd hold his hand up, and the one who got the loudest applause would be the winner. That's the way you did judge whoever won the contest. I sang my Three Little Fishes, and the rest of them did theirs. And then he came along. I'm standing in line. I'm the last one in line. And he held his hand over everybody in there, applauding and everything. He gets to me, and the only thing is, boo, boo. And if I had been the last one, it'd have been all right, but I was, and I ran off the stage crying. Jimmy Wakely followed me and said, Laverne. You have to get my book to find out why I'm saying that, but that's my real name. Anyway, he said, Laverne, I've never heard anybody talk like Donald Duck like you did. And I said, yeah, and I'm not going to do it anymore. He said, wait a minute, do you want to be in show business? I said, well, I thought I did, but I'm not sure now. He said, listen, here's what I want you to do. I'm going to come back in about 3 weeks to do another program. I want you to go home and write an act of Donald Duck and his 3 nephews and come back here and give it on this stage. I said, no, I'm not. He said, Jim Laverne, promise me you will. And I said, all right. Well, I got home and told everybody what happened. My brothers were ecstatic. Man, now you little shut up. Oh, dadgum. But my mother said, don't worry, babe. We'll show him. I said, Mom, would you help me? She said, certainly I will. So together, Mom and I wrote an act of Donald Duck and his 3 nephews going to the rodeo, which I'll tell you right now won a contest in Hollywood. I did it in every theater of the war where I was, every place I was. Over in England at Rainbow Corner every Friday night. I used to do that act when I was going to the Royal Academy. I'm jumping all over everywhere, but I mean, just to let you know that was the act. And sure enough, 3 weeks later, I went back, did Donald Duck and his 3 nephews going to the rodeo, and it won big. It was so good. And a lady, one of the judges, walked up to me and said, Laverne, you did a great job with little Donald Duck and his 3 nephews, but if you hadn't given me that 1.5-minute introduction as your own self, as Laverne Shin, I never would have given you the contest. So that's what she said. You let that little duck take you as far as he can. But don't forget, you are the one that really counts. And I said, oh, thank you. I didn't even hear what she's saying because I was looking at that $100 bill that I'd won, and I'd never even seen a $100 bill, much less thought I'd ever own one. Donald Duck literally is the thing, that one voice that meant so much to me. And I can tell you now, you know, Dennis, that became the voice of little Yankee Doodle in the Yogi Bear show.
Yeah, but there's something about Yankee Doodle, and in a minute I want to ask you about your character, Webster Webfoot.
Okay.
But you can understand your Duck character, and the Clarence Nash, God love him, who was Donald Duck. They almost had to repeat what he said so the audience could understand it.
Yeah, I felt so good. Betty White used to be on the show before me. This is back in 1952. She was at Channel 13 where I was, and she was on the air and had Clarence Nash as her guest one day. And the producer of her show, Tiny Rainier, told him, Clarence says, why don't you stay in after Betty's show and go on with Donald with little Webster Webfoot and Uncle Jimmy Weldon. He said, don't talk to me about that guy. He said, man, I started doing this duck before he was even born. And now I go into junior high schools and with Donald, and the kids look up at me and say, that's not Webster Webfoot. And man, it was the greatest compliment I ever had, because I tried to see Walt Disney. They sent me out to Hollywood and said, let him be the standby Donald Duck. I never even got in to see Walt Disney, but later he found out who I was when I was on the air. One of the people went out to Walt Disney and saw him in his office and said, why don't you sponsor Webster Webfoot with Donald Duck drinks? And he said, don't talk to me about that guy. Don't ever mention him. So at least he knew about me after all before he died. I don't mean that ugly. It sounds so ugly, but I don't mean it that way. I just mean I'm thankful he finally knew who Jimmy Weldon was, that tried to see him those many years ago to be the standby Donald Duck.
Jimmy, that's pretty amazing. You thought you might be the backup for Donald Duck, but I guess...
that was the biggest thrill I had. Man, the Chamber of Commerce had sent me out there from Chickasha, and I felt so good, and couldn't even see him. Couldn't get in the back door. No, couldn't even get in the fence at Walt Disney Studios.
Well, you know, Disney was a pretty picky guy.
Yeah.
Eventually you would get to Hollywood, but it all started in local radio back there in Chickasha, Oklahoma. Was that before or after you were in World War II?
Oh, no, it's afterwards, because a new little station, KWCO in Chickasha, Oklahoma, just was going on the air when I came home from the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts after I'd been over there, and came home. The KWCO was just going on the air. That's the first little radio station, only one that's still there right now, 250-watt station. This is KWCO in Chickasha, Oklahoma.
You were in the first staff.
Oh, yeah, I was the first staff announcer.
You were a charter announcer.
That's it, the first job I ever had. I remember, Dennis, listen, I was so careful. I remember I was, this will tell you, I'm doing the newscast, and Mom is sitting in the the other room, watching me, looking through the glass where I'm broadcasting. And I'm reading this thing, and I said, President Truman is steaming down the Potomac in his yacht Williamsburg.
Yacht?
when I looked up, Mama's face turned white, and I didn't know what I couldn't say. I couldn't go back and change it. It was Y-A-T-C-H, and I thought it looked like Yatch to me. Instead of saying yacht, he said he's steaming down the Potomac in his Yatch Williamsburg. And boy, that was it. I was so embarrassed. And then another time I went on early, and I said, my commercial I opened on there, and I just running in the studio, and I said, fresh meats, fruits, meats, and trying to say something. I got all mixed up.
Isn't it funny? Because I remember, you're not going to believe this, knowing me as well as you do. I remember sitting there at that first radio station where I worked, and I was afraid to open my mouth. and the manager, Joe Edwards, walked in, and I can almost see what I'm wearing, in that memory. And he said, I hired you to talk. Now say something. And I was humiliated, but now they can't shut me up. But isn't it funny how memories, the events were so vivid back then?
Yeah.
Oh, it was strict. I remember we had to do what was called take the meter readings, which was to check the dials to make sure the transmitter was working properly every 15 minutes.
Right.
We had to do it back then.
1946, I started on the radio, and I was there till 1948 when I moved to Duncan, just 40 miles south of there. And I remember the manager said, stick with us. In 2 years, you're going to be making $50 a week. And, man, that was the biggest. I couldn't believe this.
Big money back then.
Oh, was it?
I know that while you were a disc jockey in Chickasha, one day a little duck knocked on the door. Tell us about how that all started.
Okay, well, I went to the manager, and I asked him, I said, I want to use the little duck voice to do a disc jockey program. Would that be all right just to try something out? And he said, oh, certainly, go ahead. The little guy didn't have any name. We named him right on the air. But anyway, I'd let him, I'd get, oh, I can do it right here at the mic. I'd look and say, oh, hey, who are you?
I'm a duck.
Well, would you like to be on the radio?
Yeah.
Okay, come over here and I'll let you talk on the radio.
All right, I'll be right there. Hello, everybody.
They all thought two people were doing it, not me, someone else. And so I introduced this guy, and I kept saying, and I asked him to name him. I said, name this little guy. And if you're the one that names him, you can have a ride in my airplane, because my brother-in-law and I owned a super cruiser, 3-place cruiser.
And you had learned to fly in the war, right?
Yeah, and I would have stayed in there, but they kicked me out. I joined the Army, and then I took the Air Force exam and passed it. And then 2 days before pre-flight at Maxwell Field, Alabama, I'd gone through Norwich University College and had qualified for bomber, pilot, and navigator, all three. And 2 days before pre-flight at Maxwell Field, Alabama, the Battle of the Bulge took place, and 36,000 of us were put back in our respective ground and service forces. And since I was a sergeant in the combat engineers, that's where I went back in right then.
So this little duck walks in, and he's on your radio show, and it's, the duck voice you've been doing since childhood, but you don't have a name for him. So
that's right.
I remember you telling me one time that you thought about Wally Webfoot at first, but it was hard to say.
My aunt came up from San Antonio visiting us and heard me on the radio, and she heard me talking about getting a name. And she called me Dooncy. And she said, Dooncy, when I get back to San Antonio, I'm going to send you a name. I said, okay. They had all these funny names coming on in, so Rit, and we called her Rit, sent me the name. And I remember I told Mom, I said, Mom, listen, here it is. She wanted to call the little duck Wally Webfoot. And I said, Mom, I can't say. I said,
Wally.
And she's, can you say Webfoot? I said,
Webfoot.
She's, oh, yeah. She said, well, why don't you change? What about Webster Webfoot?
Hi, Webster Webfoot.
Mama, that's it. So that's how Webster was named.
So your mom comes through again.
That's right. And so everybody started calling him Webster Webfoot, but thought he was, like I say, thought we were two different people, because I used to use a waste paper basket, and put it over my head when I said he was doing something ugly. I got to do this for you, Dennis.
Okay.
He would come in and talk. And I said, wait a minute. And if he did something I thought was bad, I said, all right, here, going in the box now.
Stop.
Wait a minute, let me put this over here. And I'd take this and put it down over my head. I said, all right, get in the box now.
Stop, don't do that. Stop. I'll be out of the box.
You gonna be good?
Yeah, I'll be good.
All right, here you are.
Oh, I can't breathe.
But they'd always say, don't put him in the box now, because little Webster says, I can't breathe.
So you end up serving with Patton. You help liberate the Buchenwald concentration camp. You go to the Academy of Dramatic Arts in London. Then you come back. You go into local radio. How did you make that transition that would eventually allow you to become a pioneer TV host in a very big market, Dallas, Texas. Tell us about that.
After 2 years of being at KWCO, I got a job at KRHD in Duncan. That was just 40 miles south. Got a little bit of an increase in salary, so Muriel and I moved to Duncan. And then one of the announcers came up to see me, and he had been at WFAA. He started managing the station there. He said, "You ought to be at WFAA." And I said, "What?" His name was Eddie Evans. He said, "Yeah, you should be there. I'm going to see if I can't get you an audition." He got an audition for me, and they hired me as an announcer, but mainly to do the Webster Webfoot show every afternoon for 30 minutes on the big 50,000-watt station, WFAA.
Well, Jimmy, so here you are, all of a sudden, you've hit the big time. You're doing radio, and WFAA there in Dallas was a powerhouse radio station.
Oh, yeah, it was 50,000 watts. I could not believe it. It was just, and I think about the little pastor when at my station, KWCO in Chickasha, one Sunday morning he came on the air and he said, "Hello, world." And he felt like he was going out everywhere, and it just barely getting out the city limits.
I know.
but I really felt that when hello world when I was at WFAA.
Jimmy, the hour is fleeting here. Let's rush ahead. A salesman from New York hears you, tells you need to go to New York. It'd be a big hit. You and your wife move there. It doesn't work. Then you go to a station, a 5,000-watt station in Oklahoma City. How did you eventually get to Dallas, then, where you became a pioneer in children's television?
I called WFAA, and Mr. Campbell, who was a station manager, got upset because nobody had told him about my being back, and he says, "Come on down here." And if he was the guy, he was the one. And when I went down there, they said the audition, and everybody on the station, my director, Ash Dawes, became one of my dearest friends, and then two other guys said, "Man, what is this? This won't last 5 minutes. What's the matter with Campbell? What's he wanting this guy on here with this duck? This will never work." Well, and they all came up and told me later, said, "Hey, you owe this to Martin Campbell because we didn't give you 1 week to stay on the air." And there it became the longest running show in the history of Dallas. I can't tell you how much I've been blessed.
Jimmy, it sounds as if those pessimistic guys took a page from your two brothers' attitude about you.
Yes!
So you're back in Dallas, and then the 40s become the 1950s, and suddenly television comes to Dallas. What does that mean to your career?
Well, it meant this much. I was on the air, and they said, "You got to get yourself a little duck." And I said, "What?" They said, "Yeah, I was on there doing little Webster Webfoot shows." And
of course, on radio, you didn't need a dummy.
That's it. And then I said, "I can't I'll move my mouth more talking for a duck than I do anything." It's like me trying to sing three little fishes back there on the stage.
Yeah, but you look at Edgar Bergen.
Yes. But anyway, I got the duck because about 15 people made him. I had a radio engineer in Oklahoma City make his little head, and another lady made his body out of paper mache. And then later, after I got him ready to go on the air, the producer of oh golly Moses, Jimmy, you got a senior moment. It's Kukla Frananali. She came down from Chicago and saw little Webster and said, "He's got to have some hands." I said, "Hands?" I said, "This duck's got his wings folded back." She said, "I don't care what you say. You got to get him some arms where the children can see hands." And I told Mom, so she made some little wings for Webster. That's how his little arms were sitting up there, so he can hold something. I didn't realize it, but that was important. So different people went into the development of Webster Webfoot as a person, instead of me. I did the voice, but there were several different people that created to make him. I'll never forget when I got this head made out of balsa wood, and I took it to an old sign painter. Listen to me saying old. I'm 89. He was 65. And I said, "Can you paint some eyes on this?" He said, "What kind of eyes?" I said, "I don't know. Just paint some eyes on there." And if you look at little Webster, the pupil of one eye is much bigger than the other, but I never even noticed it. I didn't notice it. He had some eyes. And then Mom made some little fur for him to put him on, and the kids used to go up and hug him, and they'd get their little fingers with candy on it. And so Mom had to recover little Webster many, many times.
Isn't it amazing, though, and I've seen you in person, when the children are looking and Webster's talking, they're not looking at you.
One day I showed my 3-year-old niece, Patty, what Webster looked like. She had heard him on the radio. By the way, when Patty Webster asked her how old are you, she said 3. Little Webster said, "I am too." Literally ad-libbing this, sitting in the living room of my own home in Chickasha. And so she said, "When's your birthday?" And Webster said, "February the 31st. And I said, Webster, what? And all these things just came out of my mind. And I said, there's no such thing. She said, don't tell me it's my birthday. That's okay. You're February 31st. You're 3. But anyway, she loves little Webster. And every time he would say anything, she'd look over at him. And I said, Patty, look at me. Look at Uncle Jimmy Mid here. I'm doing the talking for Webster. It's me. Webster doesn't talk. He's just a little play-like fella. But I was moving his head all around all the time. After I got him on there, I couldn't keep from moving him. It was just a natural movement. And so I'd say, all right, now, you say hello to Patty, and look at me, Patty. And as soon as Webster said, hello, she looked straight over at Webster, and it didn't make any difference. And I thought, what's the matter with this little girl? Was something wrong with her?
Well, now, but that taught you a lesson.
That's right. I realized then, hey, wait a minute. A ventriloquist always looks out at the audience and tucks around like he doesn't who's now if he can talk. And I realized if I looked at Webster like I look at anybody else talking to them, they'd look at him too, and they did. They used to ask me, said, how do you move his eyes? I said, his eyes don't move, but I would do the expression for him.
And Jimmy, in doing so, you've created a lot of magic.
Never did I ever think of little Webster as a real human being and worried about him like they said Charlie McCarthy one time at a radio program. He was reading the script and he stopped me. He said, Charlie, I really love you. Why do you really give me a steady trouble? And he said, well, okay, bring it so forth. And the producer said, what's he reading? Where's this coming from? He literally went off track. Well, no, not me. But one time on television, when a little child asked me a question, and I said, wait, what's the answer? I'll let Webster answer it for me. But I did it. I didn't say, oh, my lands, Webster answered, and I didn't know it. I'm let him do it to make him more real than ever. And I'd say, wait, how do you know that? Webster says, well, that's all right, I'm listening, or something like that. But never did I ever, Webster, react to something that I was not in control. You try to make the little character as real as you can. I've told people in my career as doing a ventriloquist, they say, what do you do? And I said, get a little character, develop that personality of that, whatever it is, little duck, dog, boy, girl, or whatever it is, and let them always keep that character. Don't change it. In other words, if I felt like little Webster was 3 and someone said something that he wouldn't understand, he'd say, I don't know what you mean, like a little child would. And it meant something because I never let him get beyond that.
We are talking to Jimmy Weldon, who joins us from his studios in Burbank, California. Jimmy, the last remaining cartoon voice of the Yogi Bear show, the voice of Yankee Doodle. But in 1950, he was a pioneer in American television, beginning an afternoon live kiddie show in Dallas. And Jimmy, when you went on the air that day in 1950, you had the character of Webster, you had the little dummy, and I hate to call Webster a dummy.
I am a duck.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Webster. But you went on the air, you had a half hour every day. This was live. Now, did you have a little peanut gallery there?
Yes. We had 6, 7, or sometimes 12 children, 2 little rows of children, on there. We interviewed them, and the little children would come out with some of the wildest things you ever heard in your life.
Did it take long to get a sponsor?
No, we sponsored before we went on the air. Sanger Brothers Department Store. I never forget. I went in to see Mr. Simmons. Mr. Simmons, bless his heart. Boy, he was such a strict man there. Everybody's so afraid of him, but he was really nice. You just had to know him. And I remember I went in when went in to see him with little Webster. He sat across the desk from me and he said, I want you to know something. I don't give a damn about that duck. The only thing I'm interested in is Sanger Brothers. Is that clear? And I said, Mr. Simmons, I want you to know something. I don't give a damn about Sanger Brothers. The only thing I'm interested in is this duck, and I'll make sure he is good. And he said, sign him. Right then, yeah.
Wow.
And then later he came up, he said, I know what you're doing. He'd see me in the hallway, he said, I know what you're doing. He said, I appreciate it very much. And he'd turn around like he didn't want anybody to hear that. Unbelievable. What a man, yeah.
Well, now, back then, not only were you about the first person in that part of the U.S. to be doing that, I think you probably took a page out of the Howdy Doody book because you had some merchandising ties, didn't you, early on?
Oh, listen, they had Webster Webfoot T-shirts and towels and dolls and everything else. But first of all, the Ideal Toy Company made a little doll, and it didn't look anything like Webster. And Mom said, I think I can make a little Webster Webfoot better than Ideal Toy Company. And I said, what? And Mom made a duplicate of little Webster, and then later hundreds of dozens of these were sold through the May Company in Los Angeles and all around. Mom was the merchandising, and Moyne, my brother, made T-shirts and caps, and towels that he silk screened. And my oldest brother helped make it. Oh, it was a fun thing. It was a whole family project.
So how long did the show run there in the afternoon of Dallas? And I presume it was late afternoon right after school?
Yes, we followed time for meeting from Hollywood, and I thought, golly, I was never dreaming one day I'd come out here and work with Dawes Butler, who was Little Beanie. And we were on from 5 to 5:30, Monday through Friday, and that was for 2 years, the longest running show with the same sponsor. And then Jimmy Wakely came, my old buddy Jimmy Wakely back there in the days when the radio, he came to the Sportatorium. He'd gone to Hollywood now and become a big cowboy star. And so he was there, and I went out after I'd done a program at the Dallas Fair. I went out to the Sportatorium just to see him. And when I walked in, Jimmy's back was to me, but the announcer was right there, and he said, "Hey, what are you doing here?" And Jimmy turned around, and I said, "Well, I wanted to see Jimmy." I said, "I haven't seen him in so long." And he said, "Is Webster with you?" And I said, "He's in the car." He said, "Go get him." He said, "Jimmy, this is the hottest show there is. He's more popular in Fort Worth and Dallas than any other thing. If you let him introduce you, it'll be the biggest thing you can do." And Jimmy's like that. I ran back just in time to go up on the stage. And when I got on the stage, I said, "Oh, dear friend Webster," and they went wild. Oh, I was so thankful. And I said, "Webster, I want to tell these people something. If it wasn't for this man we're going to introduce right now, you had never been on television." What? I said, "That's right. He encouraged me to be in show business. One of the greatest cowboy stars of all time. What an honor and thrill it is for me to introduce to you the great cowboy star, Jimmy Wakely." And I just had a tear, I couldn't stand it. And when I ran off the stage, and he grabbed me. He said, "Don't leave." And for the next 45 minutes, he played the little Webster and me right there on the stage, and the audience just went wild. Oh, it meant so much. And when we left, he said, "You'll be in Hollywood in 2 weeks." Said, "What is your name again now, Laverne?" He didn't even know I was Jimmy Weldon. Boy, what a thrill to even remember. He said, "What is your name again now, Laverne?" So sure enough, he got out to Hollywood and called and saw MCA, and they called me, and I went out and I told the people I'm going to go out for a vacation. One of the guys at WFA said, "You ain't never going to come back. You'll never come back to here."
Now, we have to move forward here in time.
Yes.
You were a pioneer children's host with Webster in Dallas.
Right.
You run into Jimmy Wakely, who was responsible for you very early on, who's now himself a megastar.
Yes.
But he's in Los Angeles.
Yes. They took me over to the May Company, and they sponsored me right then. So they bought Little Webster.
So what was the first thing you did in L.A. then?
Well, just a little Webster Webfoot. It was on Channel 13, and we were sponsored by the May Company. And I did program appearances all over everywhere. And I remember with the first Lakewood May Company store, we had an appearance. There were 5,000 little boys and girls and moms and dads down in the basement to come see Webster and me. At our first appearance, it just meant more to me than you can imagine.
Well, I think one of the great stories you like to tell involves the fact that as your career matured on television in Los Angeles, which of course is, who would not want to be on TV in L.A.?
Yeah.
The fact that Hollywood stars that you would run into playing golf, because you're quite a golfer, would come up to you and talk about Webster.
Yeah. I did a thing at Brentwood. I did a program for the Brentwood schools. The people who picked up the tickets were Randolph Scott and Jeff Chandler. Can you imagine that? And they both told me, said, "Uncle Jimmy," said, "our children think more of you as a star than they do of us." And I said, "Oh, God, thank you."
Also, you had a little side trip where you replaced Sherry Lewis on New York City television.
Oh, yeah. I went, after my program was over in Los Angeles, I went to Fresno, and then they called me to New York to replace Sherry Lewis on the Hi Mom show in New York. This was a big, big place. This is the flagship station. And I went up there, but I couldn't stand it. This is the most horrible experience I ever had. I remember I walked out on the street of NBC, go to NBC, and I walked out on the street, and an officer was at "Sir, pardon me for bothering you, but where's the 49th Street entrance to NBC?" And he said, "What's the matter, Mac? You lost?" And I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "Well, go over there and ask somebody." And he turned right around. I thought, what did I say wrong? Man, I'm telling you, nobody. Mira and I had a nice apartment at downtown Manhattan, and we were on the 12th floor, I think it was, 10th or 11th floor, 12th. And we get on the elevator, and people that were on the same floor with us wouldn't even talk to us. They didn't want to talk to anybody. And I thought,
the bottom line is, both of your times in New York City, you'd rather forget.
That's right. That's right. I'm sorry to say that, but you're right, Dennis. I'm sorry. Forgive me, all of you in New York listening to this, wherever you are.
Let's move on to the good times. You made it big in L.A., and you were on TV in New York, and you met an awful lot of people in Hollywood. The reason so many people remember you now, particularly through the Cartoon Network, is having voiced Yankee Doodle on the Yogi Bear show.
That's right. That's the one
How
thing.
did that happen?
Well, I was on the air in Fresno, and Hanna-Barbera had seen me already in Hollywood, and then they decided they were going to do this new program, Yogi Bear. And they needed a little character called Yankee Doodle. And they called me and said, would you do the voice of a little character we got on a new series coming up? And I said, certainly I would. Never did I realize that would be more to me for my career than anything, Dennis. The idea of Yankee Doodle, wherever I go, wherever I speak, people always say, oh, golly, I always wondered what the guy looked like that did the voice of that little duck, Yankee Doodle. I remember one big time, I did a program for 600 people at the Bally's, a luncheon, and I had the MC make an introduction like this. He said, I now have the task of introducing our speaker. I say task since I've heard him before. At least you all had a good meal, and this is great, because I seriously doubt if you could take this guy on an empty stomach. No, I'm only joking. 20 years ago, he's an unknown failure. Today's a known failure. And I jumped up in the middle of the audience of these 600 people, and I said, why don't you sit down? This was all planned. And I looked around the room. I said, hey, look, I'm here. I'm right in the middle of the room. How many of you know who I am and heard me speak? Now, please, show me hands, please. Nobody. Who's this old guy? And I said, looking all around, how many of you have no idea who I am? And they're still looking like, what the heck's going on? And I said, well, at this point, how many really couldn't care less? And then a few of them giggled. And I said, I'm going to make a funny statement. I'll bet there are not 4 of you in this room who do not know who I am. You just don't know you know me. And then it really brought something in. I said, you know, one of the greatest things God gave us is a creative imagination. I want you to go back 45 years ago when you were little children, and you were watching those popular program on television called Yogi Bear. I said, now close your eyes, please. Play this with me. It's the reason. Do it. Close your eyes. They close your eyes. I said, little duck named Yankee Doodle and Fibber Fox or someone's chasing him through the woods, and he's calling to his best friend, Chopper, a great big bulldog.
Help! Chopper!
They raise their heads. Close your eyes. They put their head back down.
Help! You're after me!
Run, little feller! And I said, now he's in front of this big bulldog. Keep your eyes closed now. I said, this big bulldog looks down at him and says, Yankee, now that you're safe, tell me, where's your mama? And he looked up sadly and said,
I don't have no mama. Would you be my mama?
And it just uproar. And I said, now open your eyes. You're looking to duck. And they just absolutely went wild. I looked up at the podium. I said, hey, I gave him that instruction. Give him a hand. I said, he did such a good job. I thought he meant it. But Dennis, that was written for me by my dearest friend, Dick Haynes at the Reins, a disc jockey that was here in Hollywood. You got to get my book because I heard him come into Hollywood from Muriel and I when we were driving out here from Dallas. He's the first person I ever heard on the radio. And we became the dearest friends in the world. But anyway, Dick gave me that introduction and using it better. And I've said so many people, you tell me which is better, that kind of introduction, or what if the MC had said, ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor to introduce the man who's spoken to more National Management Association chapters than any speaker in the United States. Ford Motor Company, Rockwell, Bendix, TRW. They'd have said, who cares? But when he said, this guy, you can't take him on an empty stomach, they automatically, I was on their side. Anything I said, they found a friend because little Yankee. And so I'm so grateful, and I've used that introduction so many times.
Now, getting back to Yogi Bear and your voicing Yankee Doodle, the director, Joe Barbera, half of the Hanna-Barbera team, I had always heard that he was just a crackerjack when it came to directing cartoon voices.
I would be there with Vance Colvig and a little Dawes Butler. We three were together all the time. And Joe Barbera, we'd look in there in the room, and he'd be giving us all the different things to do. What a tremendous director. And it was good. We had fun with it. I had a little a glass of water, ice, that is, because when I was not doing talking, I'd take this ice and put it in my jaw and keep it cool and kind of lock it up to where I could talk a lot longer without messing up my mouth. It was unbelievable to think I was using ice to keep it kind of where you just run and keep it going. I could do it easier. Dennis, I met a lady who was another director, Susie Blue. She's done a lot of directing for cartoons, and I was in the studio with her watching this guy, and when she finished this direction, I turned to her. He had left, and I said, you know what, you're a female Joe Barbera. And she said, what? And I told her what had happened about how she was directing for this guy out there in the studio doing a part, and how she looked like Joe Barbera. It made her feel real good.
Did you do the Yankee Doodle line, I don't have no mama, in all of the Yankee Doodle cartoons?
No, but that was the main one. That was the one thing where everybody wanted somebody to be his mama. Yeah, that's it. That was the number one line that little Yankee was known for so much.
I don't have no mama. Would you be my mama?
Yeah, and in his little line,
I love you.
That meant so much to him, yeah.
And Yankee has, I don't know whether it's a laugh or a snicker. It's just a wonderful sound.
Yeah. Donald Duck was so brazen, you know.
Donald Duck.
That was Donald Duck, but little Yankee...
No, I love everybody.
Now, after establishing yourself as a great voice actor, you made a lot of friends in Los Angeles. The word got around that you're easy to work with and you're a great actor, and you start showing up on television shows, including Dragnet, which means you would have worked with someone I would have killed to have met, and that's Jack Webb.
I'll never forget, I walked up to the studio at Mark 7, and when I walked up there, I looked at him, just as I was going in the door, he stopped at the middle of the door and looked at me, pulled out a package of cigarettes, took one out and lit it and looked straight at me, didn't say one word, and he just turned around and walked off, and I thought, dadgum, he didn't say anything, and so I walked on in, followed him, and got into the regular place, and he said, all right, here's the scene, we got to do this now. I'm going to have about 25 seconds of dead air, because I'm going to be doing narration over it. He walked over to the guy there, and he said, look, you just get ready, whatever I say to you, just talking, and soon I'll give you the line, and we go right into it. And so he said, yes, are you ready? He said, yes, sir, okay, fine. He said, roll it. I mean, that's all, just like that, and I'm saying, what's going on? So the guy said, roll it, Mr. Webb, and then she says, 20 seconds, and in the meantime, Jack Webb said, hey, you're looking awful good. I like that outfit you got on there. Did the prop department give you that? And he said, yes, that's fine. He said, yeah, you look the real part. And he said, 20 seconds, Mr. Webb. And Jack says, how'd you know he's dead? The guy stood there and he said, cut! He said, did you hear what I said? I gave you the line. How'd you know he's dead? He said, he said, look, I'm going to go 20 seconds here with narration. And when I get to the line, let's get into it. You be ready to go. Are you ready? And he said, yes, sir. I could picture this poor old guy doing some other job all night long. And there he is with Jack Webb, scared him to death. So Jack said, all right, roll it. Same thing happened again. He says, fine, now let's calm down. You're going to be great here. I know you are. And he said, 20 seconds, Mr. Webb. He said, how'd you know he's dead? He said, well, it was obvious because when we came in, we saw that, and obviously he was, hold it. He said, cut. He said, how many obviouses you got in this? He said, well, there's two. He said, just say one. Just say one obvious. That's all there is. Just do it. Okay, roll it. And he did, and he says, okay, Jack said, okay, we got to get this done. I got a lot of stuff to do today, like that. And he said, how'd you know he's dead? He said, well, it was obvious. We come in, when we first came in here, we had it so-and-so, and he said, it was obvious. There's it obvious again. Jack said, how did you know he was dead? By this time, the guy just stood there. He didn't know whether he's live, dead, or whatever it was. And he said, hold it. He said, read that to a camera. We'll get back to you. Let's go to the next set. And I thought, good golly Moses, that was Jack Webb. And the guy said, Sheldon, Jimmy Sheldon. And I went around the corner, I said, it's Weldon, W-E-L-D-O-N, Weldon. I thought, damn, I'm going to go down swinging one way or the other. And when I got around the corner, Ben Alexander was there. And Ben Alexander was Welcome to Heart's Desire. He had a program on radio when I first started in Chickasha. And I walked out, I said, Ben, I was on radio station KWCO in Chickasha, Oklahoma, when you used to come on with Welcome to Heart's Desire. He said, oh, golly. And he said, when Jack walked in the room about this time, and he said, Jack, Jimmy Weldon used to be on the radio when I was on Heart's Desire. And Jack Webb walked up to me and said, how's little Webster? And when he said that, I literally died. I'm telling you, my heart just melted. And so he said, you ready to go? I said, yeah. And we walked over the next scene. He said, all right. He said, are you ready to do it? And I said, yes, sir. And he said, okay. So he said, all right, roll it. And he's back behind this door. And so when he opens the door, they're rolling. And then he opens the door, and I walk in. I walk down, I look down to the floor, and then I walk over to my part and turn right around. And Jack Webb says, has anybody been in this room since the murder? And I said, no, sir. I told him everybody to stay out of here. Jack Webb looked over at Ben Alexander, and he's going, he's laughing, and he says, what's the matter? Jack's, what's the matter? He said, I didn't expect that. And the guy from the up catwalk, way up high, said, give him hell, Texas. And I was standing there, I thought, what in the world's happening? I said, did I do something wrong? And Jack said, no. He said, let's help him out, Ben. Come on. We went back over to the other place. And you see, because all the people on Dragnet was always like this. Yeah, okay, yes, master. Okay, fine. Yeah, yes, sir, yeah. And when I said, no, sir, they just knocked Ben out. So anyway, this time he said, Jimmy, don't look around. Don't look around the room. You've been in there before. Just walk straight over to your place and turn right around. I said, oh, yes, sir, okay. We did that. And he says, could I leave the camera here and go to a page and skip over to another page? I said, yes, sir. I was so thankful I'd studied that script because we went through 7.5 pages of dialogue, bang, 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 without stopping. And he knew exactly what he wanted. That's all it was. And so when he got through, he said, all right. He said, let's go to the next set. He said, Jimmy, I want about 25 seconds of just coming back. He said, when we get over here, just a camera, no microphone or anything. He said, I want to come back and I'm going to tell you that we came back to check and see what was going on, and whatever I say, if it's yes, you nod yes. You'll see me nod and shake your head no. I'll do all the narration. You just look. Only thing you're doing, just look, camera. It's okay. So he said, give me 30 seconds of this. He said, roll it. And he said, okay. He said, and he looked at me, he said, has anybody been back here since we were here the other day at you? And I said, yes, sir. A car came up here. And he said, no joke. Like I said, yeah, it's a big old long car, a Cadillac. And I said, a bunch of men were in this. I thought it's kind of funny because they stopped and they looked around someplace, and then there was mud on the license plate. I wanted to get the license plate, but I knew you'd need to be important. And they opened the door and the dog got out. He went over to the tree, and Jack Webb stood there looking at me, started smiling. And he said, 30 seconds, Mr. Webb. He said, let him go. And I was just telling all about this dog and how he went to the bathroom and everything and so forth. And finally, Jack walked over, put his arm around me. He said, God, I think you could talk forever. And he said, let's go. That's great. He said, what are you doing? I said, nothing. This is the first thing I've done in 15 months. He said, well, it's your agent's fault. You ought to be doing something all the time. You read these lines great. I said, thank you. And so after we were through, we went back, and the next day Herm Saunders said, I don't know what you did to Jack Webb, but he thinks you're the greatest thing that ever happened. I said, thank you. Well, unfortunately, I went right to Fresno and started another show and never got back in there again. But I thought he was tremendous. What a guy.
You became, over the years, one of the best-known motivational speakers on the West Coast. Let me just give you a minute and a half here to encapsulate your message. It's impossible for you to do it, but suppose I say to you, Jimmy, I don't have any drive. I think I'm a failure. How can I turn my life around?
Oh, golly, I would say, Dennis, just all you have to do is have goals to work for. I heard a man speak one time. He changed my life from an actor into a motivational speaker when he said, you can do anything you want to if you believe you can. And I looked at him, I thought, what? What is this? And he said, yes, you're the most important person in the world. You know more about yourself than all the people in the world combined. And you're the only person you're never going to leave. So it's up to you. Whatever you want to do, you can do it. Remember, what you tell yourself is far more important than what you say to anyone else. The person who says, I can, and the one who says I cannot are both right 100% of the time. So goal setting is the key. You got to have some reason for getting out of bed, some reason for being. And that's why I thought when I was a little boy and I saw that movie and Mama said it was about acting, I said, Mama, one day I'll be an actor. And I realized then my life was crystallized. I never grew up wanting to be anything but an actor. I didn't grow up being a fireman one day, a policeman, or a doctor. I knew I was going to Hollywood. But I didn't realize, Dennis, that success is a daily progression toward worthwhile predetermined goals, one after another, not a destination. I thought when I did that picture with Ronald Colman in Hollywood that was the end, until I heard that man speak and say Conrad Hilton used to sit on the floor pretending he was a hotel operator when he was 7 years old. And he said when he got old enough, he bought a flea bag in Cisco, Texas, to put all those ideas into being. And a fellow who owned a hotel down the street came to him later and said, Conrad, you've transformed this building into the most great, wonderful thing I've ever seen. Can you tell me what you did? Conrad Hilton didn't say, hell no, get your own ideas. He said, I'll be glad to tell you. He helped him, but the guy down the street just wasn't a hotel operator. He asked him to buy him out. And this was in Cisco, Texas. Conrad Hilton thought, well, if I bought that hotel, I could be twice of value, twice as much as I am right now with this one in Cisco, Texas. But that was the beginning of the Conrad Hilton Hotel.
Jimmy, is Webster close by there?
Yeah, Webster.
What?
Come over here.
All right, I'll be right here.
Webster, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you. How are you?
Oh, I'm fine. I want you to do me a favor. I want you to take...
This is Dennis Daly.
Oh, hi, Dennis.
Hi, Webster. I want you to do me a favor. I want you to take really good care of Jimmy.
I will, I promise. I promise I will.
Dennis, thank you so much. God bless you, guy.
Jimmy, it's been a wonderful hour, and thanks for being on the show.
All right. Bye-bye.
I love you. Bye-bye, everybody. Bye.
Hope you enjoyed that. Thanks for going back into the archives with me. I'm Dennis Daly. See you next time, right here on YouTube.